but whatever. Okay, so we're going to talk about some experimental philosophy. Oh yeah, let's also update the, I'm going to fix this thing too. Will this help? Yeah, okay. So cool. So I've got the paper listed here and cool stuff. Nice. All right. So as always, feel free to ask questions along the way, and we'll see if we can figure out what's going on. All right. The experimental philosophy movement started out as a criticism of what it took to be the core of philosophical methodology, the practice of constructing cases or thought experiments and then eliciting intuition about those cases. According to this view of philosophical methodology, intuitions are used as evidence for or against philosophical theories. A good theory of knowledge, justice, freedom, or reference, for example, should be consistent with the intuitions we have about cases, thought experiments. The experimental philosopher's core idea was this: if philosophy is based on intuitions about cases, we need to check what intuitions people have, what influences those intuitions, and whether they track truth reliably. So they conducted experiments to check on that, hence the name. The results were discouraging. They appeared to show that intuitions about cases varies across subjects and are easily influenced by irrelevant factors. They concluded that the standard methodology was flawed and that this undermines an enormous amount of work done in philosophy. In the first chapter of Edward Mashery's new book, he rejects this way of understanding X-Fi. And X-Fi is the cutesy way they call experimental philosophy, X-Fi. Like X-Files. I have an X-Files shirt somewhere. I really want to see if I can find it. Anyway, he endorses the view of some of the most ardent critics of X-Fi. Mashery agrees with Cappelen and Deutsch that the X-Fi movement made a fundamental mistake when it described standard philosophical methodology as relying on intuitions about cases, and he agrees with the critics of experimental philosophy that intuitions play no role in philosophical practice. However, he doesn't agree with Cappelen and Deutsch that this makes X-Fi pointless. His book is an effort to show how experimental philosophy without intuitions can still be philosophically significant. It's a bit like how you might think about acupuncture. You might think that there's something to the practice of acupuncture, even though the classical theory of why acupuncture works is false. If so, you reject the view that chi, or life force, is moved around so-called meridians by needle pricks, but nonetheless think that the practice of sticking needles into people can be useful. You reject the theory of acupuncture, but preserve the practice. Mashery's attitude towards experimental philosophy is similar. The theoretical scaffolding of experimental philosophy, as we find in Mashery, Malin, Nichols, and Stitch, Knob, Nichols, Nagel, and among many others, is false. The appeal such authors make to intuition, both when describing their experiments and when criticizing or supporting philosophical practice, is like the appeal to chi in acupuncture. However, says Mashery, lovers of X-Fi should not despair. X-Fi without intuitions can have massive philosophical significance. Alright, this is already very strange, like incredibly weird to me. The idea that like you're going to have a theory that we have, it's like, alright, so the theory of qi, by the way, if you guys don't know, comes out of, I think, classical Chinese medicine. And it's an idea, it's basically a humor theory. Like we had humor theories in the West, it's also a sort of a similar thing there. And so you've got different flows of forces or of some sort of fluids that go through your body, and this is basically kind of, they regulate stuff in your body. The history of medicine is very, very, very strange. We do not have a very good grasp on what health is. Even nowadays, Western medicine is very reactive. Something breaks, we go and fix it. The idea of chi, of course, is not like that. It's that you have some sort of maintaining, that's why they call it a life force, something more maintaining health. And so it's not a reactive thing. But like, it's now, can you go find a fluid that corresponds to chi in the body? No. Does that mean that chi in some sense is wrong? Also no, because in some sense maybe we're not looking in the right way. But the idea that there's something that is maintaining your health, maybe we can figure out some sort of like reactive, not a reactive thing, but maybe there is some sort of subsystem that does correspond to chi, or is something there. So the idea that there was a theoretical attitude in experimental philosophy that we're going to find the intuitions, and then this is not a good idea anymore because the intuitions have nothing to do with it. This is different. Because why? Because it was never found to be useful to begin with. Like, if it's already like wrong, and then you were going to say, well, it's right. This is the X-Fi imposed the theory that we're going to go find intuitions to be philosophically significant. This is separate from the traditional Chinese medicine, which has 1,000 years of history of people working on this and trying to solve stuff. And moreover, traditional Chinese medicine works on certain maladies at basically equivalent rates as Western medicine. Granted, if you have certain things, you need Western medicine to go fix them. That's not in question here. But for certain sorts of things, the traditional Chinese medicine does work. So it has legitimacy in certain respects. So there's a disconnect here between where is the legitimacy coming from. The traditional Chinese medicine that talks about qi, it has evidential backing to it. The X-Fi didn't have that, and now they're saying, well, it's still good, even though it never had that. So that's a bigger pill to swallow. But yeah, I hope that made some sense. The book is bold, provocative, engaging, ambitious, and well written. It draws on and synthesizes an extraordinary amount of recent work. It is an important contribution to contemporary metaphilosophy, and most readers will learn a lot from. Most readers will learn a lot from. I should immediately add that I say all this despite disagreeing with most of the central claims in the book. That this combination is possible is nice, disturbing, and somewhat puzzling feature of philosophy. Okay, so they're saying, look, we think they're wrong, but it's still worth your read. Okay. Nintendo Pharmacon, what would it mean for X-Fi to have evidential backing? Okay, so it would be like if we had a bunch of intuitions in philosophy, and then they went and they found out that when we went looking for those intuitions, that they actually corresponded to something, I guess. You're right, that's a good question. I don't know, and that's, I think, part of their problem is that it's very, very easy to, change people's opinions. If you frame a question a certain way, people will give you different answers. And so I think this is part of the issue is that they thought they'd go find that everyone had certain intuitions about, you say like the trolley problem, and it just wasn't the case. I think they didn't find that people had any consistent opinions about what was right or wrong. Like, now if you put kids in a philosophy class and you sort of set it up a certain way, then you kind of know what they're going to say. But like if you just like hit any random person, you don't actually have I think it's very hard to get any like straight answers. So yeah, I'm not sure what they thought they were going to find, so but let me know. So Nintendo asks, so to discover robust, consistent intuitions among the general population. I think that's what they were looking for in experimental philosophy. They wanted to go find out if, if everyone would pull the lever and like save 5 people but kill 1. So if like everyone kind of did that, they'd say, hey, maybe people are just consequentialists. They are basically adding things up most of the time. Like 5 dead people is worse than 1 dead person. So I think that's actually what they thought they were going to go find out. I mean, I could be wrong, but I get the sense that like it was just, has anyone actually gone to test this before? And no one had. And so one of the things people do is like, you can go on the internet and like go to Mechanical Turk. So are X-Files moral realists? I think that was part of like the question. Like, is this what people actually do? in some sense, I don't know if it was that they thought moral realists is that if everyone didn't actually do what like a certain theory said, then it'd be evidence that, like you say, if everyone acted like in not the consequentialist way, then you'd say, well, look, no one is actually a consequentialist in reality, and so you could at least rule that out. You could still, of course, say that like consequentialism is the best theory, but you'd have a harder time if you're saying no one actually is doing it. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure what the position of X5 people are on realism, but you could definitely rule stuff out even without being a realist. Okay. Mastery on X5 without intuitions. And yeah, keep asking questions. I mean, I try to do what I can. According to Mastery, philosophical practice relies essentially on what he calls the method of cases, in which philosophers use judgments about thought experiments as evidence. Experimental philosophers have said these were intuitive judgments and then gone on to claim that those intuitions were unreliable. Mastery, on the other hand, denies that there is anything distinctive about judgments philosophers make about thought experiments. They are just ordinary judgments. He calls this view minimalism. No particular property distinguishes the judgments elicited by philosophical cases from everyday judgments. Judgments elicited by philosophical cases do not possess a phenomenology that everyday judgments do not have. In particular, we do not feel we have to make these judgments. You talked to Joshua Knobe about it once in a coffee shop. I wish I'd asked him this. That would have been cool. Then we could at least have some evidence. See, that would be a experimental evidence right there. They do not have a distinctive epistemic status. For instance, they are not justified a priori. They do not have a distinctive semantic status. They are not analytic. They do not have a distinctive ideology. They do not express our conceptual competence with the relevant concepts. Minimalist characterizations of the method of cases do not require the judgments elicited by philosophical cases to share any particular content. For instance, minimalist characterizations do not characterize them as fast judgments that have not been consciously inferred. Some judgments elicited by philosophical cases could be consciously inferred, others could be slow. Alright, so basically, there's no reason to privilege our thoughts when it comes to philosophical thought experiments, which I agree with. Like, I 100% agree with most of the time, like, especially if, it's not like in a corner philosophy that you need like experimental you need experience and like a history and like background knowledge to know. Then I think most of that is just like they're completely normal, unless you're talking about like, you know, if you have like knowledge of like something in quantum physics or something, and then you need like then they're talking about a distinctive ideology, express conceptual competence. That's the only time that like I think that would break this. But yeah, I agree. Most of the time when we're talking about philosophy, they're asking for kind of just what do you think, not some special knowledge. Alright, this is where Mastery agrees with the critics of X5, such as Cappelen and Deutsch. However, this leaves Mastery with the dilemma. On the one hand, Mastery is not a skeptic. He doesn't hold the view that ordinary human judgments are excessively unreliable. On the other hand, he does want to argue that X5 has shown the philosopher's judgments about cases are fundamentally unreliable. How can those two positions be reconciled? If philosophical judgments about ordinary cases are just ordinary judgments, and there's nothing generally wrong with ordinary judgments, what's so deeply flawed about philosophical judgments? The answer is that philosophical cases have disturbing characteristics, and these are I'm sorry, that's hilarious. And these are the sources of the unreliability revealed by the experiments done by Mastery and other experimental philosophers. The disturbing characteristics are moreover essential to philosophical cases. It's impossible to do traditional philosophy without appealing to cases that have the disturbing characteristics. I mean, to be fair, like, the trolley problem is a disturbing thing. You're talking about running people over with cars. Like, that's what the trolley problem is. But like, you're taking people out of the ordinary, and that's part of the thing. So here's the question then. If philosophical judgments are ordinary judgments, but philosophical problems are not ordinary problems, does that make sense? And I guess that's part of what this dilemma is. Because Mastery wants to say they're just ordinary judgments, but then if you also say philosophers are wrong, then why are philosophers getting out of the ordinary? And it looks like they're saying, well, there's disturbing characteristics in the philosophy. Okay, yeah, and that's what we're getting to. Mastery's primary focus is on 3 disturbing featuristics. The unusualness of the cases, that's 1. 2 is the cases pull apart properties that usually go together. And 3, that it's hard to separate the superficial content of the cases from their target content. I turn now to some critical remarks about this part of Mastery's project. Most of my discussion will concern one of the disturbing characteristics, unusualness. I think what I say about this will generalize, and if so, it has wide-reaching implications for the overall project in the book. Yeah, this is exactly where I thought they were going. The whole point of philosophy is that you're asking unusual questions. Like, that's the point. Why else would it be philosophy if everyone just thought it was everyday and commonplace and there was nothing to ask about? So, if you're specifically asking questions that don't have common answers, then you can't say that the answers that you're getting are supposedly commonplace answers too. All right. Why unusualness is not disturbing. It is easy to describe unusual, infrequent cases that are easy to reliably judge. That refutes the claim that infrequency unusualness is a source of unreliability. Here's an example like that. There are no orange elephants, so we don't encounter them, and there's little literature about them either. Nonetheless, we have no problem making various judgments about orange elephants. They can be small, run fast, be sick, scary, etc. It's unproblematic to attribute the property, say, of running to an orange elephant in a thought experiment. Mastery discusses this very objection. He says that the objection fails because situations involving orange elephants isn't what he has in mind when he talks about unusualness. He says, a lie is a lie, whether it is made in an actual situation or in the world of Game of Thrones. Okay, so what is unusualness? In reply, we get a sufficient condition. It is unusual if it describes a kind of situation that we rarely encounter in our experience or from description. So, this or from description is what I guess Mastery wants to say. But the author here says it is hard to see how this helps. Here's a kind of situation, the kind that involves orange elephants running. That kind is infrequently encountered in experience or descriptions, but we can reliably describe orange elephants involving situations. We are just as reliable in our descriptions of these as we are in our descriptions of real gray elephants. And I think this is fair, because I think the criticism is fair. I think what Mastery wanted to say was, look, you can arbitrarily change the color in descriptions, and we describe colors of varied colors of things. Like, I could say, like, this shirt wouldn't be whatever, it's like khaki green or something, but you can imagine this was like chartreuse or like blue or anything, and we can do that easy. So this would be something like a shirt can be any color, animals can be various colors, like that's no big deal. So it's not an unusual thing. But then the question becomes, why is the trolley problem unusual? We can imagine trolleys running down different tracks. We can imagine stuff on the tracks. It happens all the time. That's how track fires, like if you're in New York, there's signs all over the subways. This is how don't throw trash on the tracks. That's how track fires happen. People get hit by the trains all the time in New York. It's very sad. But like, this is not an unusual thing. The unusual thing would be to be there having a switch, but specifying why that is so unusual that you could flip a switch and like change the direction of a train when there's something on the tracks. It's not actually, like, it gets a little bit more unusual, but it's hard to exactly see why that is a special kind of unusual as opposed to like an orange elephant. Okay, to Mastery's credit, he tries hard to engage with this kind of issue, and there's a second line of reply. In his discussion of funny colored elephants, he says that their color is not germane to getting it right. He says that whether one is adding chairs or pink elephants is not germane when one is adding. This then makes it super important that we are given an account of germaneness, but Mastery has nothing to say about this. On the face of it, the appeal to what is germane is unhelpful. Consider the following thought experiment. There are 2 pink, 1 orange, and 1 gray elephant in the room. Then 7 orange elephants walk in and none leave. The question, how many of the elephants are in the room are orange? The answer to this is easy, and we're reliable in making the judgment, but surely the color of the elephant is germane. Otherwise, I just don't know what germane means. The question, after all, is about orange elephants, so how can color not be germane? Yeah, I mean, you don't even have to call them elephants. I mean, you could have like an albino elephant, which does happen. So then it wouldn't even be, like, you know, an unusual color for elephants. You could have like different colored elephants. Anyway, but this is the point, that there's no easy way to separate out a philosophical question from just an unusual everyday question. I mean, basically that's what philosophical questions are. They are everyday questions, but for some reason they get to us, but there's no obvious way to know what is going to be a philosophically interesting question ahead of time. I mean, if you could do that, you could make $1 million by just write like a book of cool philosophy questions. But it usually takes a lot of effort to figure out what is actually a good question versus like orange elephants, gray elephants, and like that's a silly question. Okay, moving on. And as the author says, moving on, I want to outline one additional concern about Mashry's claim that unusualness is a source of unreliability. Consider our ability to attribute properties like unusual situation to situations. Mashry must assume that we are generally reliable when we attribute that property to situations, because he assumes throughout his book that he can reliably make judgments about which situations are unusual. He's confident that the cases philosophers appeal to are unusual. That's a central thesis of his book. So despite unusualness being a source of unreliability, we can reliably judge that situations are unusual. That's paradoxical if unusualness is a source of unreliability. Maybe Mashry thinks that we can reliably attribute unusualness to unusual situations, but that we're unreliable when it comes to unusual situations. This move assumes, without argument, that philosophical cases fall in the former category and leaves unexplained why we would be reliable in judging unusual cases. Unusualness, after all, is what we are supposed to be unreliable at judging. Yeah, okay, so basically the move here says, well, even if I can't give you a rule to separate out philosophical cases from non-philosophical cases, maybe we're just really good at it. Like we're inherently good at seeing what counts as philosophy. But I mean, that's hand waving. You can't just say, "Oh, people are good at this." You need something, and basically, if you're talking about judging usual versus unusual things, then it would be paradoxical that you're so good at being we're very regular or very usual at judging the unusual. So the author is being a little cutesy here, but that's okay. Okay, so this is a problem because you can't a priori know what is a good philosophical question, and if we can't do that, then then and Mashry needs that thing, then Mashry's in trouble. Okay. So I'm in agreement with this author. Against the essentiality of unusualness. I've raised some concerns about Mashry's claim that unusualness is a source of unreliability. I turn now to Mashry's claim that unusualness is essential to philosophical thought experiments. Of course, if my first argument goes through, then essentiality wouldn't be a serious concern, but the claim is still worth exploring. What's the evidence for the essentiality claim? Note that the essentiality claim is extraordinarily broad claim about literally hundreds of thousands of papers, arguments, and claims made by philosophers. We should expect detailed empirical engagement with philosophical practice to substantiate the claim. There is nothing of that. Instead, we get unsubstantiated generalizations like the following. Competing philosophical views often give the same verdict about ordinary situations. In order to distinguish them, philosophers must consider unusual situations. As a methodological point, I suggest that detailed engagement with the rich practice of philosophy should be expected of anyone making such broad claims. Mashry should engage in detailed investigation of a broad range of philosophical texts, and for each of them show that unusualness is essential. To see how hard that would be, recall that Mastery must be operating with a technical and complicated notion of unusualness. He does not, for example, think that science fiction describes unusual cases. Talking foxes, ghosts, flying dragons, magic spells, invisibility cloaks, and such things do not fall under unusual for Mastery, and if they did, it would be a reductio of his view. Recall also from the earlier discussions that he'll have to distinguish between usual unusual situations and unusual situations. Here is what I think will happen. Mastery can try to come up with a diagnostic for unusualness or unusualness in the form of some conditions C. Then his claim is that philosophers do not only do but must rely on cases with C features. His job then is to show that a few hundred arguments in the philosopher's mind, language, science, art, mathematics, etc. have to have the C features. The book doesn't even begin to provide such evidence, and I'm not an optimist that this would turn out as Mastery needs it to. CJ, what's up? How you doing, CJ? Yeah, trying to stream. Hope you're doing well. Welcome in. We're talking about experimental philosophy, where some philosophers went out into the actual world and asked people what they thought about philosophy situations. So, but then this guy wrote a book, and then this paper is criticizing the book. I hope you're doing well, CJ. So, yeah. This is a little bit silly, I think, but I'm gonna get through it. Okay, continuing. Before I leave essentiality behind, one final point. Note that essentiality is a strong modal claim about the properties of the thing that Mastery calls philosophy. It is, in effect, exactly the kind of immodest modal claim that Mastery in Chapter 6 argue is not within the proper domain of philosophy. Mastery is, after all, doing philosophy in this book, and the lesson of Chapter 6 should apply to the book as well. Yeah, I mean, you'd want to know what is it about philosophy questions that make them so interesting. And so it's an immodest modal claim. Like, if you can just make this claim that all these things have this property that makes them like philosophically interesting, you'd want to know what that is, and then you could go investigate that, but not that modest. Okay. I have focused on Mastery's claim about unusualness for two reasons. First, what I have just said about unusualness generalizes to the other alleged disturbing features. For example, the feature of pulling apart properties that normally come together. Limitations of space forces me to leave that as an exercise for the reader. Second, if you spot me the points about unusualness generalized to the other disturbing features, a big ask, then it's a serious problem for Mastery's entire project. More or less everything that follows depends on these disturbing characteristics really being deep and essential sources of unreliability. If they are not sources of unreliability or not essential, then one, we don't have an alternative account of why experimental philosophy is philosophically significant. What's up, Tropical Geek? Oh, thanks for stopping in. I am not on Instagram. I don't really do a whole lot of social networks. I have just basically Discord and like YouTube. I think these links are still good. I am not 100% sure if they are. But thanks for stopping by, and I hope you're doing well and the modding goes well. Okay, yeah. Twitch, my Twitch is a good place to get a hold of me. I appreciate that, Tropical. Yeah. All right. So what are we talking about? Yeah. So the author is just trying to generalize. If you can't pick out what is interesting about philosophy in general, then you can't go ask people about what's interesting about philosophy in general, then what are you talking about? And this is the problem. So, more or less everything that follows depends on these disturbing characteristics, like being unusual, really being deep and essential sources of unreliability. If they are not sources of unreliability or not essential, then one, we don't have an alternate account of why XY is philosophically significant. The disturbing characteristics are supposed to play the role of intuitions in traditional experimental philosophy. They're the new boogeyman. If they're not as bad as advertised, or not bad at all as I think, it's no longer clear why we should think experimental philosophy without intuitions is philosophically significant. 2. The aim of Chapter 6 is to delineate what philosophers can and cannot do. The argument goes like this. Philosophers tend to ask questions about metaphysical necessities. In order to get at those, we have to rely on thought experiments that have the disturbing characteristics. Our judgments about such cases are unreliable. Corollary, we should stop asking for metaphysical necessities. Mastery says, why is the music getting loud? Louder song. In light of the limitations of the judgments elicited by philosophical cases revealed by the previous chapters, I argue in this penultimate chapter that, even if there are modal facts, many of the modal facts that matter for philosophy are beyond our epistemic reach. We philosophers are not in a position to acquire the desired modal knowledge. And just so anyone out there doesn't know what you mean by modal, modal is a mode of being, like it's in this context, it's like a necessary condition of the universe. I mean, you can have a modal fact like what's a pragmatic thing, like what do you what's the like what can you, like if you're gonna go to the fridge, what are you gonna like and get something to drink? Well, you can get things that are basically fridge, like that you keep in the fridge. That would be a practical thing that you could get. And so, like, what's possible to get to drink from the fridge? Maybe you have water, maybe you have soda, maybe you have milk, stuff like that. Now, if we ask him modal in this context, it's like necessary for the entire universe. Well, then you're talking about, well, there's like space-time and stuff like that. Like those things are modal necessities that we need to live in three-dimensional space or plus time or whatever. But like it's just like, well, many of these facts are for philosophy are beyond our epistemic reach. It's like, yeah, like we don't actually have the possibility to find out most of this stuff about the world. We have maybe a few things. Okay. Just wanted to say that. Okay, continuing. It is clear, therefore, that the core claims of Chapter 6 build on the previous chapters. They presuppose that mastery has correctly identified essential sources of unreliability in judgments elicited by the typical philosophical cases. If I'm right, that part of the project fails, and so the foundations for the claims in Chapter 6 evaporates. Before moving on to some comments on the last chapter of the book, I pause to mention a view that springs quite naturally from these lines of criticisms. Metaphilosophers should give up the idea that there's a small set of features that characterizes all philosophical cases. I would go further. The term method of cases doesn't denote a theoretically useful class. It encourages the thought that there is uniformity where there isn't. The thing that we call cases come in too many varieties. The source of their degree of difficulty is multifaceted and cannot be separated from their specific subject matter. Issues having to do with mathematics, art, action, the mind, language, and morality are difficult for their own peculiar reasons, often specific to particular theories and arguments. Philosophical methodologists should give up the simplifying assumption that there is a unified class of things called cases, and that by focusing on a handful of features of this fictional class, philosophers get to criticize work done by thousands of colleagues without careful engagement with their arguments, theories, and texts. Okay, this is like, philosophers love doing this, though. They love being like, I figured out something about philosophy, and this is what it is, and this is going to talk about all this stuff, all of it, and then we'll be able to solve all these problems and move on, and like it will be like then we'll like be so advanced. This is like this happens constantly in the history of philosophy. I've solved all these problems, now we're going to move on. So the idea that this is going to happen is nonsense. That's not going to happen. This is never going to happen. Philosophers love saying that they've solved a bunch of problems and they've ruled out a whole class of things that all these other philosophers have been wrong about. So this is wishful thinking right here on the part of the author. I sympathize, but and in some sense I sympathize, but they're also kind of wrong about this, in my opinion, because a lot of times we do get ourselves like caught up on some ideas, and then like a whole slew of problems that we thought were bad turn out to be, we were just caught up on something. And so a whole group of stuff does sometimes simplify down. What happens is philosophers get arrogant and they think they're going to solve everything because of that. Hey, question mark, how you doing? We're reading the paper on this is basically taking experimental philosophy to task. This is a review of Edward Mashery's recent book on it, experimental philosophy, and is hammering Mashery, I think, kind of hard. But yeah. So the question is, can we actually get to the bottom of what is philosophy and like classify that stuff? I don't think so. But the question is, could we do that in certain areas of philosophy? Maybe we could do it in a certain area of philosophy. So the idea that we do it over all of philosophy, that's not happening. But maybe you could do it in one of these like sub-disciplines of philosophy, like the philosophy of art or philosophy of action. So this, I sympathize with what the author is doing here. It happens constantly in the history of philosophy that philosophers say, "Oh, I've solved all the problems." Maybe on a limited basis it could happen, but yeah. Okay. Almost done, actually. And like I said, everyone feel free to ask questions. I turn now to the final chapter of the book. In the penultimate chapter, Mashery argues that the kinds of questions philosophers tend to ask cannot be answered. In the seventh and last chapter, he gives a partial answer to the question. So, what should philosophers do? The proposal is that we should engage in what I will call conceptual analysis 2.0. It's a new, naturalized form of conceptual analysis. It is easier to say what CA 2.0 is not than to say what it is. Here is what CA 2.0 is not. It does not aim to deliver a priori analytic synthetic truths. It is not a semantic notion. It does not aim at giving analytic or conceptual truths. It is not an epistemological notion. It does not aim at giving a priori known, justified, believed propositions. Instead, what it does is provide us with empirical truths about the mind. Concepts, as Mashery construes them, are retrieved by default from long-term memory to play a role in cognition and language understanding. A body of information is retrieved by default if and only if retrieved processes if retrieval possesses the three following properties. Speed. Default information is quickly retrieved from long-term memory. Automaticity. Default information is automatically retrieved from long-term memory. And context independence. Default information is retrieved from long-term memory in every context. Conceptual Analysis 2.0 has both a descriptive and a revisionary component. We can describe the content of the information that constitute a concept, but just as importantly, we can also be prescriptive or revisionary. In the revisionary phase of Conceptual Analysis 2.0, we can identify some beliefs that we should adopt when we think about things that fall under the concept. Okay, the disconnect between CA 2.0 and the revisionist tradition. Alright, this is just weird. Like, I don't know like what you guys think, but like the idea that we're just like, this is like knee-jerk reaction. This is like, that's what I get from this. Like, your knowledge or whatever this is, like these things right here, this is like knee-jerk reaction. You're gonna do it fast, you're gonna do it automatically, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's like the doctor taps your knee and you kick out. Like, that's fast, it happens automatically, and it doesn't matter when you get your knee tapped. Your leg is always gonna kick out if it hits the right spot. And there's basically saying that this is what knowledge this is what like philosophers are supposed to be doing, is to find these knee-jerk reactions in mind, in like the philosophy of mind. So these are what concepts are, as Mashery construes them, are our knee-jerk body of information that we just automatically pull up, which is interesting. Like, could we find a bunch of like reactions that we have in terms of like what are these things called? Like when you hit your funny bone, like you get like an instant response, or when you hit your knee, like that sort of thing. But yeah, so it's a little bit of a strange view of what philosophers are doing, just finding these sort of like biological reactions that have to do with mind. I mean, yeah. Does anyone even think that that's the sort of thing that happens? Like, if someone says something, do you just immediately respond with something else? How would that even look? Very strange to me. Okay. In Chapter 7, it is important for mastery to align the revisionary component of Conceptual Analysis 2.0, I'm just going to call it 2.0 from now on, with a revisionary tradition in 20th century philosophy stretching from Carnap on explication up to Haslinger and other contemporary revisionists. Mastery aims to show that this tradition can be naturalized by focusing on the amelioration of concepts construed as described above, that is, as a body of information retrieved by default, where that is characterized by speed, automaticity, and context independence. I share Mastery's enthusiasm for the revisionary tradition. Following Blackburn, Brandom, Sharp, I call that project conceptual engineering. There is, however, an important disconnect between the project Mastery describes, revising the things he calls concepts, and the revisionary tradition that he appeals to and relies on throughout the last chapter. The conceptual engineering tradition is focused on concepts as determinants of extinctions and intentions. It is essential to Carnapian explication that the semantic value change, for example, there can be no processification without such change. It is essential to Sally Haslanger's ameliorative proposals for gender and race terms that their intentions, and probably also extinctions, change. That's why she can describe her aim as getting rid of women, see Haslanger. 2000. I'm sorry about all the big words in this area. It's kind of philosophical inside baseball, but I'll try to explain in a sec. The same can be said about all various cases in that tradition. It is also true of the other cases that Mastery discusses extensively, causation. One of his examples is Ned Hall's claim that there is more than one concept of causation. But when Hall says that, he is not talking just about fast, automatic, and context-insensitive beliefs about causation. It is crucial that the two concepts of causation have different extinctions and intentions. In sum, the project Mastery advocates isn't the project of any of these revisionists are engaged in. Okay, so basically, I think what the other people here, they're saying, look, you can change your ideas when it comes to concepts, but the idea is that there's a semantic value change. That means the meaning changes on your concepts. So it's like you have an idea of something and then you change the value of what it's actually talking about. So like you have an idea of like, is this a pencil? It's like, yeah, it's a pencil, but you could change your idea about what counts as a pencil. Like maybe this wouldn't count as a pencil anymore. But this is the thing, when you're talking about what Mastery is talking about, something that you automatically react with, that's not what people are talking about. Like if you can change your mind about what a pencil is, that's fine. But what you talk about when you just like automatically react fast and immediately, that's not kind of what these other people are talking about. Like if Sally Haslinger's trying to change what people think about gender and race terms, yeah, but like that's not how people react. That's not what she's talking about. She's talking about what people think when they reflect on these things, and maybe also what like that will that change the people. But that doesn't seem to be what Mastery is talking about. He's talking about something reactive. Okay. One additional point about this, if the revisionary tradition in philosophy, as I suggested, is concerned with revising extinctions and intentions, alright, extinctions are the things like the actual objects, and the intentions are the ideas you have about what counts as such things. Like the intention of, that's what's in your head, the extinction's out in the world. So it's concerned with what's in your head and what's out in the world, not the reactive thing. That's not kind of what it's talking about. Then it might well be the case that the revision is not a project in psychology. Yeah, let's see, wait. Yeah, I mean, the revision is not the psychology, it is a philosophy thing. I mean, I hope the psychologists are not talking about this, because if I'm talking about pencils, the physical pencil, like the pencil in the world, that's talking about an object. It's not talking about the psychology of the object. Now, if you're talking about the intention, maybe there's psychological facts there, but, it's just talking about that you have some idea that there is a pencil. There's, I mean, you can talk about the psychology, but I think it's a pretty basic fact that if you're thinking about pencils, there is some, like, that's okay. That's all the philosophers need out of it. Okay. Author continues. Those of us who are externalists think that the semantic value of an expression is determined by the features that, in Putnam's famous phrase, ain't in the head. That's what I said. So if you think pencil, it's out here in the world. It ain't in your head. That's what pencil is. These features could be environmental or social, or they could depend on activities over which we have no control, such as the baptisms and the causal chains of communication that result from them, or again, the particular details about how an expression is used by the millions of other speakers of our language. If externalism is true, revision is difficult because the semantic values are determined by something outside of our control, and so, pakshe mashery, revision is not a project in psychology. Yeah, so basically, it's like, I think this is a pencil, you think it's a pencil, but like this has got these different theories. Like, well, there's a huge history of calling things like this pencils, and so if you're trying to change your mind about reacting to this, that's not going to change what a pencil is, because it's not in your head what a pencil is. It's out in the world, and you can't really just you can change how you talk, but that's not changing what pencils are in any like serious way. I mean, that just would put you just make you kind of weird for talking about something that you already knew was a pencil and then changing your mind about it because you thought you wanted to do something, but you're not doing anything about that. Yeah, and there's a few different theories about it, like here, but they come to the same thing, and it's not worth getting into it more unless you have questions about that stuff. I can talk about a little bit about how we fix names to objects, but it's not a merely psychological thing. There has to be a history here, otherwise, it like you didn't come up with the idea of pencil. I didn't come up with it. It existed before us. So, okay. The disconnect between conceptual analysis 2.0 and philosophical practice. Much of Chapter 7 is devoted to an account of how 2.0 can help us do philosophy. According to Mashery, 2.0 helps make our concepts explicit, and this can have a therapeutic effect because it will help dispel philosophical puzzles. It might, as an illustration, reveal that we have several distinct concepts of causation, and this explains why we seem committed to incompatible complaints about the properties of causation, as well as why straightforward philosophical accounts of causation appear prone to counterexamples, resulting in added epicycles and convolution. And I just realized I'm being stupid. I should shout out CJ if she's still here. I haven't done this in a while. Let's see if yeah, everyone go follow CJ. CJ streams Minesweeper. Club Penguin was recently streaming a some really, really cringy dating advice, which was funny. Sorry about being slow on that, CJ. I'm not been streaming for a while. But yeah, CJ is an old friend. I hopefully get to hang out soon. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of fun over there. So, okay, what was I just saying? So I got myself confused. I was reading this. Oh yeah, so basically, yeah. Why? Let me just finish up this paragraph. Mashery also recommends conceptual analysis 2.0 because it helps us assess the inferences concepts dispose us to draw, which will help us modify the inferences that are in some way defective. As an illustration, he uses inferences we make involving the concept of race and consciousness. Okay, yeah. So if if Mashery is right, and then it's super helpful, it'll be super helpful, and then that'll be great. But I mean, again, it's like you have to be right for it to be helpful. Author says, I have my doubts about these alleged applications of conceptual analysis 2.0. I think the use of concept gives a veneer of plausibility to the claims Mashery makes on behalf of 2.0. If we constantly remind ourselves that what Mashery means by this, a subset of judgments that are made fast, by default and in a context-insensitive way, then the claims he makes starts to look bizarre. This is because most philosophers think slowly, carefully, and endlessly assess the judgments we come up with. They are not what Mashery calls default judgments. Of course, philosophers are normal people who in their day-to-day life will judge fast and rely on defaults. However, take the claims made in this review. It took a really long time to write. I've thought about every sentences in here for a long time. I have read the whole thing over many times. I've had other people read it, etc. What I just said is, of course, entirely trivial. We all know that these are features of the claims made in theoretical work by philosophers. We don't rely on fast and default judgments. Philosophers who theorize about race or consciousness or any of the topics that conceptual analysis 2.0 allegedly should help us with think carefully and slowly. They rely on arguments that are assessed carefully over long periods of time. What matters is not the default, fast automatic judgment we make. What matters to us, or should matter to us, is the truth of what we say and the validity of soundness of our arguments. 2.0 won't help determine whether claims are true or arguments valid. It can help us assess the truth of claims about what people's default judgments are, but that's not what philosophical theories of, or for example, race or consciousness are about. However, that is exactly what I'm doing here. You're getting my knee-jerk reaction about philosophy. So maybe this is a philosophy of Twitch. But, and aside, that was a joke. The reason I can read the philosophy stuff like this and just talk to you about it is because I've looked at a ton of it. I've looked at a shit ton of it. I've thought a shit ton about this stuff. And so when I see this, I can tell you what it is because I've thought about it before. I've seen it before. I don't remember the last time I saw it. I don't remember the last time I thought about it, but I have thought about it. And I've put a bunch of time into this. And that's why I can read it and tell you what's going on because I have experience with this. And the idea that you're getting a default fast automatic like reactive judgment, yeah, you are. But that's because I put the work in. I put a lot of work in. And the idea that like that's a normal reaction, I can tell you my reactions are not like other people's reactions. They were never like it even when I was younger, and now they're even less like other people's reactions because I put a ton of time into like changing my ideas about stuff. And so the idea that you're getting like a common reaction when I'm reading this is you're not getting that. And like this is why I'm in agreement with the author here. You're getting a knee-jerk reaction, but if I were to go back and reread this, it would be a different I'd have a different opinion. It might be not that different because I'm mostly in agreement, I think, but it would be different and it would be better. I'm always like, it would be better the second time reading through this, and it's not just me doing what I can while streaming in streamer brain. Streamer brain is real, people. Like, you can't think as well. Well, I've got like 3 different things going on. I've got camera, I've got OBS, I've got Twitch, I've got a stream deck now. It's like I can just like touch stuff, so I can be like, boom, yeah. It's like, oh, so I can just do another shout out immediately, and you can see CJ's Club Penguin thing. So it's like, is that how we're judging things? Not really a good idea when it comes to like serious stuff like race or consciousness. Okay. My underlying worry about the last chapter can be put like this. Mastery wants to destroy our cake and eat it too. He wants to destroy our cake? What? Oh, wow. On one hand, he argues that what we philosophers care about is pointless because modally immodest and so impossible. On the other hand, he also wants us to say that conceptual analysis 2.0 can help us with the questions we care about and work on. Causation, consciousness, etc. The problem, I've argued, is that 2.0 doesn't help answer those questions. Chapter 7 is in large part an effort to do something Mastery shouldn't aim for, given the conclusion in Chapter 6. If he wants to burn down our house, the last chapter better not be a proposal for how to decorate it. He should just build a new house in a different place. Okay, this is interesting because, I know a lot of people don't like experimental philosophy. This person does not like experimental philosophy. Let's see. Even they said some things went by too fast here. Where was that? Oh, yeah. This is actually what I was going to explain if people had questions about it. But yeah, so the question is, why would you want to go ask people about stuff? And if you don't want to go ask people about stuff and there's things, what's the idea of experimental philosophy then? It's like, well, is it still thinking about stuff in the right way, even if you can't rely on what you're asking? And he says, no, because you're still asking the questions. And it's like, well, then if you can't ask people questions and get evidence, then it doesn't matter like what they say, and then you can't use that to like talk to philosophy anymore because they don't have the same sort of because they're not asking the questions that philosophers ask. Ordinary people, if they want to talk about philosophy, they do, but if you're just asking them random questions, you're gonna get everyday answers. You're not gonna get philosophically interesting answers usually. So it's like, if you're not gonna get philosophically interesting statements, then what is the point? And that's kind of the thing at the end. It's like you can't identify what counts as good philosophy, then you can't investigated either experimentally. But that's why philosophy is a like armchair thing. You have to think about it real hard and a long time. And asking people questions is good, but you have to know what questions to ask. And that's sort of that's where the philosophy is figuring it out ahead of time. All right, any questions about